Without objection, the request is granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2025, the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Brown, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous materials on the subject of this special order.
Without objection.
It is with great honor that I rise today to co-anchor this CBC Special Order Hour along with my distinguished colleague, Rep. Kamla Gurdove. For the next 60 minutes, members of the CBC have an opportunity to speak directly to the American people on erasing Black history, an issue of great importance to the Congressional Black Caucus, Congress, and the constituents we represent, and all Americans. It is with great honor that I rise today to lead this CBC Special Order Hour. For the next hour, members of the CBC will speak directly to the American people on the topic of Black history and ongoing efforts to erase that history. Mr. Speaker, this is a time of fear, worry, and anxiety for millions of Americans. President Trump said that he was going to usher in a golden age. But after 119 long days of this presidency, it hasn't felt like a golden age. It's felt like a dark age, especially for Black Americans. President Trump and his administration have attacked diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the government, in schools, and in the private sector. President Trump has rolled back anti-discrimination laws, and Trump has tried to freeze federal funds that benefit Black communities, including in my district in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. And it's not just about his actions, it's also about his words, rhetoric, and value. President Trump and his allies have blamed diversity, which is just code for Black people, for the January plane crash at Reagan Airport, for the South Carolina wildfires, the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore, even the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment, and on and on and on. If something goes wrong somewhere, anywhere, in their mind, diversity, equity, and inclusion is to blame. In President Trump's vision, every Black American on the job, every woman, every immigrant is a DEI hire. A DEI hire who is blocking more qualified white men from the jobs and positions of power that are rightfully theirs. And President Trump has the audacity to talk about his agenda being about restoring meritocracy. They use that word over and over and over again in their executive orders. Meritocracy. The meritocracy of his Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, an unqualified TV host, texting war plans to people by accident. The meritocracy of his Health Human Services, Mr. Robert Kennedy Jr., a conspiracy theorist whose primary experience in healthcare and science is using Google. The meritocracy of Elon Musk's unvetted, unqualified, and unaccountable minions at Doge. And the spoken and unspoken message behind all of this is that Black Americans and other minorities don't deserve a seat at the table, and we don't have merit. And the impact is real. Last month in my district, a man checked out 100 books on Black, Jewish, and LGBTQ topics from the Beechwood Public Library. He didn't check out those books to read them. He checked them out to burn them. And he didn't do it in secret. Oh no, he didn't hide behind shame. No, he posted this on social media because he wanted people to see. See, this kind of hate doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's part of a disturbing wave we're seeing across the country. A wave fueled sometimes with a a wink and a nod, sometimes with a bullhorn, by leaders who should know better than to fan the flames of division for political gain. A wave normalized by the Secretary of Defense banning books about diversity and deleting Pentagon websites highlighting the service of women, LGBTQ people, and minority service members, including Major League Baseball legend Jackie Robinson. Mr. Speaker, what happened in my district isn't just censorship, it is an act of hate, plain and simple. And I've joined leaders from across Northeast Ohio in condemning this act. These attempts to erase the voices of marginalized communities are an attack on the values of inclusion, empathy, and understanding. You can only truly have a community with understanding. And to understand your neighbor, you have to understand history. That's our topic tonight, history. And I'm deeply concerned by the ongoing effort to erase Black history from our museums, from our schools, and from American life. See, last month, President Trump issued an executive order to, quote, restore truth and sanity to American history. And of course, there are all kinds of debate when it comes to history. That's how we advance knowledge. But is that what Trump cares about when he talks about truth? Of course not. His executive order directed Vice President Vance and the Secretary of the Interior, two individuals who are not historians, to remove objects, exhibits, and funding from the Smithsonian museums and national parks that don't fit Trump's agenda or Trump's incorrect version of history. That bears repeating. Trump's incorrect version of history. And think about all the Smithsonian museums, all national parks, all the historical exhibits around the country. Now, where do you think they've directed most of their attention? That's right. Their main focus has been on the National Museum of African American History and Culture, right down the street on the National Mall. Are you surprised? You shouldn't be. Trump's executive order mentioned that museum by name out of hundreds across America and laid the foundation for denying future federal funds. And one thing we've seen from this administration, they mean what they say. This is such a radical shift, and it's happened in just a short time. Trump's takeover of the Republican Party seems like it's been forever, but it hasn't always been like this. When the National Museum of African American History opened in 2016, it was a bipartisan celebration. Joining President Obama that day was President Bush and Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. These aren't woke individuals by any means, but they understood the importance of that museum being on the National Mall. And in a perverse way, Trump does too. That's why he's attacking it. But Black America is not taking this sitting down. In the last month, Black churches from across the country have organized trips to the museum and fundraisers to support it. Black America raised their voices when Peak Head Seth tried to erase the history of Jackie Robinson, because our history matters. Black excellence should be celebrated. The role we have played in shaping our country should be recognized. And the pain and legacy of slavery and discrimination should be understood. Because if we don't reckon with our past, we will never understand the present, and we will never build a better future. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we know it's not just the president that wants to erase Black history, and we know the backlash didn't start just this year. In 2023, the state of Florida, our nation's third most populous state, released education guidelines that included that slavery provided benefits. Benefits, because slaves were able to learn skills. They now require that's part of their curriculum, that slavery was beneficial, some type of workforce training program. Florida also launched a comprehensive effort to ban advanced placement courses on Black history, while local school districts were newly empowered to ban books on Black history. This is a nationwide problem. In fact, there are now more states where teaching Black history has been restricted than there are states where it is required. That's right. Only 12 states out of 50 require Black history be taught. While there are now 18 states that have passed legislation restricting Black history education, and here's why this matters. We know there is inequality in this country. No one would deny that. We know who overwhelmingly has the wealth and the power and the influence, and who doesn't. In America, for every $100 in wealth owned by white households, Black households own $15. And you can find statistics like that no matter how you slice it on housing, health, savings, you name it. Last week, we were debating nutrition benefits and food stamps in this body. In my district, 1 in 3 Black households rely on food stamps. For the white households, it's 1 in 10. And this is the heart of the issue. Do you recognize, like I do, like my CBC colleagues do, that this discrepancy did not happen by accident? It didn't happen by accident. It happened by design. Or do you deny and think that all the racial inequality in this country is really the fault of Black people? That's really the argument. And the only way you can make that case is to erase history, whitewash history, and rewrite history. That's why history matters. That's why our museums matter. That's why our books and our literature and our experiences matter. And that's why we are going to keep fighting back. So I'm honored to lead this special order hour tonight. And with that, I want to yield to my friend, the Honorable Gentle Lady from California's 37th District, Miss Sydney Kamlaga-Dove.
Well, thank you to my colleague from the great state of Ohio, Congresswoman Shontel Brown, and the Congressional Black Caucus for organizing this special order hour. Tonight, I, along with my colleagues, rise to talk about something that should terrify every freedom-loving American: the coordinated, relentless Republican campaign to erase Black history, to erase American history, yes, to whitewash the truth and silence our stories. Donald Trump called for patriotic education instead of honest education. This is a dangerous euphemism for censoring Black pain, Black resilience, and Black excellence from the classroom. And since then, over 1,500 books have been banned in public schools and libraries across this country. And more than 40% of them feature Black authors or Black characters. What kinds of books, you ask? Well, I have some for you. Books like Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, like Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, and oh my God, even a children's book, I Am Rosa Parks. I mean, why are you trying to erase a book written for babies to help them learn their history? Why are you so scared of little babies? Books that we have all read in school, books that we have all checked out in libraries, books we have all discussed in book clubs, books we have all shared with the little ones in our lives. And why this ban? Because when you erase our history, it is easier to erase our progress. Trump and his MAGA allies want our children to grow up ignorant of the truth and of who they are. They are trying to scrub federal websites they are scrubbing federal websites of any mention of Black contributions to science, literature, politics, or innovation. And let me tell you, the list is long because we have been in this thing for hundreds of years, bringing innovation and progress to this country. And all I have to say to that is, wow, Mr. Speaker, just wow. And yes, they want to alter the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, a museum that millions have visited from around the globe, including students and families, to learn about our nation's true story. And all because they don't agree with how their ancestors and how they have been portrayed. So don't be mad at me, because you don't like you. Let me say that again. This president is trying to erase institutions, literally. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? That's just a weak move. That's a punk, weak move. He has said he wants to get rid of every policy, every agency, every grant, and every effort related to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sounds to me like somebody who's scared of the truth. That means rolling back protections against discrimination, removing mentorship and workforce programs aimed at closing opportunity gaps, and wiping clean any official recognition that America ever wronged Black people in the first place. And you know what? Guess what? You ain't gonna be that afraid. We still here. We ain't going nowhere. This isn't just about politics. And while Trump and House Republicans are busy erasing our past, they are also working overtime in the dead of night to erase and destroy our future. Mr. Speaker, we know this White House is serving the billionaires in this country, but the House, okay, this body is supposed to directly serve the people. And instead, the majority party has decided to serve Donald Trump, and that is the problem. How are Speaker Johnson and House Republicans serving the president? Well, I'm glad you asked that, Mr. Speaker, even though you didn't, but you know you want to. So that's when I'm going to pivot to the so-called big, beautiful bill. Or how about the billionaires' backstabbing bill? A nearly 400-page monstrosity, here it is again, in small font and fine print, and designed with one goal in mind: to enrich billionaires and punish working families, especially Black families. So let's start with the numbers. $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid, a rollback of SNAP and nutrition assistance, hitting Black and brown communities the hardest. In 2023, over 25% of Black households relied on SNAP benefits, and a whole bunch of other groups relied on SNAP benefits too. No meaningful investment in housing, and while over 40% of Black renters are cost-burdened, this bill offers nothing, nada, zip, to ease the affordable housing crisis. A plan to unravel Social Security as we know it, directly harming the nearly 5 million Black Americans who rely on those benefits in retirement. And to top it off, a permanent tax break for billionaires like Elon Musk and the president. That's right. While they strip away health care and housing, they are cutting taxes for billionaires with private jets and yachts and $400 million planes. And to be clear, less than 15% of constituents in every single congressional district, red and blue, less than 15% of constituents in every single district support cuts to Medicaid. And Mr. Speaker, you read this. Moody's just downgraded the U.S. credit outlook. You know what that means: higher interest rates, more expensive loans, deeper household debt, more expensive money. This hurts families already stretched thin and disproportionately hurts Black families who already face a median wealth that is just 1/10 that of white families, according to a 2022 study. So when this president and MAGA Republicans say they want to help the American family, we have to ask, which American families. Because the regular families I represent in South Los Angeles, Culver City, Ladera Heights, and all across the 37th Congressional District in California are not being helped by this bill. They're being targeted. And just to reiterate, I have 700,000 constituents in my district, like every other representative. I have 470,000 constituents that will be kicked off Medicaid if this bill is passed. Okay? My constituents are being told, you don't deserve to learn your history. You don't deserve access to health care. You don't deserve decent housing. And you definitely don't deserve a tax system that's going to treat you fairly. Well, Mr. Speaker, the American dream should not be reserved for those with a trust fund or a Mar-a-Lago membership. The American story should include all of us, our ancestors, our struggles, our resilience, our achievements. We cannot build a just future on foundations of lies and fear and erasure. The real question is, why are you so afraid of us? Because you certainly try to get our hair, our men, our body types, our culture, our food. You want us as friends and validators. And quite frankly, it is exhausting having to navigate all of the insecurities of those trying to erase us. We here in this Black Caucus, we are going to fight against, we are not going to forget, but we are going to fight against policies that punish the poor and reward the powerful. We are going to fight for a country where Black history is American history and Black futures are American futures. Because as the saying goes in our country, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. And you best believe they will get it wrong. Well, we are telling our story tonight, and we are telling the real truth. And with that, I yield back.
And now, Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege and pleasure to yield to the Honorable Mr. Troy Carter from the state of Louisiana.
Thank you to our outstanding leads tonight for this special hour. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Today I rise in support of our museums, our cultural institutions. We know that African American history is, in fact, American history, and it must be recognized as such. The Musk-Trump administration's executive orders targeting museums are disgraceful. It's a disgraceful attempt to erase Black Americans' contributions from our nation's history. I'm especially disgusted by the administration's attack on the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. For so many years, under the leadership of the late John Lewis, who played a key role in the efforts to secure funding and legislation for this museum to be. Our community fought for the creation of this museum. Our community fought many times when Republicans fought against. But finally, it was finally signed into law in a bipartisan way. It was signed by George W. Bush in 2003. Yeah, it was a bipartisan effort. This museum that tells the story of the struggles of African Americans and the contributions of African Americans, which, by the way, is American history. History that everyone should know. Yeah, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's history, just that. It happened. You can't untouch or touch up what's already happened. When it was finally signed, many stood together, hand in hand, Black and white, Republican and Democrat, recognizing the significance and the importance of this monumental legislation. So I ask you, why was it okay then for Republicans, Black and white and Democrats and independents to stand together hailing the importance of this international museum of history that recognizes the contributions of African Americans, the pain, the suffering of African American community? Why was it okay for us to be lockstep then and not now? Why is this Republican administration so threatened by this museum that you would seek to defund, defame, and deface? This museum today is a testament of the legacy of generations who sacrificed everything for justice, progress, and equality. We will not stand by as our history is dismissed, diminished, or defunded. The National Museum of African American History and Culture is not divisive. It is essential. It tells the truth of a people who built this nation, endured its greatest injustices, and still rise to shape its future with brilliance, faith, and resilience in the face of great obstacles, even in 2025. Yet we rise. When they chose to target museums that honor Black history, they're engaging in a deliberate attempt to silence the truth and to erase the past. I demand, we demand, and we all should demand full support for every museum and institution that honors dignity, struggles, and the contributions of African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and all Americans, because our history is important. African American history is, in fact, American history. You cannot separate the two. Our history is a history that everyone should know. The Congressional Black Caucus earned the name, the conscience of the Congress. We are here tonight to say, hands off the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Hands off our hard-fought gains. Hands off the efforts to remind people that a history that is forgotten is a history that is repeated. History and culture will stand, and all other similar institutions across our nation should likewise be protected. Let's end this foolish Musk, Trump notion that our Constitution doesn't matter, that our rule of law doesn't matter, that our ability to work together somehow is a bad thing. We know it isn't. I implore my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to wake up and not let anyone divide us any further than we've already been divided. We are one country. We have a responsibility to the people to do the right thing. We will continue to use all the tools in our toolbox. You've heard me speak of the 3 C's: the Congress, the courts, and the community. And we will use every one of them, and we will continue to fight until victory is won. I yield.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from Louisiana, a place with rich culture, my good friend Troy Carter, and now it is my distinguished privilege to yield to my good friend from Virginia, the Honorable Jen McClellan from Virginia, representing the 4th District. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am a proud Virginian. Virginia is the birthplace of American democracy. It is also the birthplace of American slavery. From the beginning of this country, we have been on the right side of history and the wrong side of history. And I am proud to stand here as a history maker in my own right. Elected in 2023 as the first African American woman to represent the Commonwealth of Virginia. How did I get here? My interest in government was sparked by a love of history. My love of history was sparked by my parents. My father, who was born in 1925 in Nashville, Tennessee, who spent his summers in Alabama at a school that his grandfather, my great-grandfather, founded because Tennessee did not think Black children were worthy of a high-quality public education. I am the daughter of Lois McClellan, born in the Gulf Coast of Mississippi in 1932, who had to leave her town to become the first member of her family to go beyond the 8th grade, because the state of Mississippi did not deem Black children worthy of a quality public education. The Catholic Church did, but only to the 8th grade. Listening to my parents' stories as a child, they saw the best of government through the New Deal. They saw the worst of government through Jim Crow. But it wasn't just what I learned in a textbook, because their stories, my grandparents' stories, my great-grandparents' stories, weren't in the Virginia textbooks. I learned them at my parents' feet. I learned them because my great-grandfather happened to write a book about his experiences. This history helped me to understand how this country was actually founded. By going to historic sites, the names and dates came alive, but my family's history wasn't told. When I would go to Monticello, I was fascinated by the idea written by Thomas Jefferson that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But I learned nothing about the hundreds of Black people, including the mother of his children, who lived at Monticello and served him, but weren't free. I didn't learn those stories visiting Monticello. I learned them later as an adult. My study of history has shown that in Virginia, this beautiful idea of a government derived from the people rather than divine right through kings was created in Virginia, the first representative democracy in the Western Hemisphere, less than an hour away from where I live, in Jamestown. But those settlers came on a business venture to take land that was already settled by Algonquin-speaking people for over centuries. And that land was exploited to make money for the Crown of England. But they created a government in 1619, in July. And a month later, the first recorded Africans were brought to our shores at Point Comfort, who were stolen from their home in Angola, stolen again from a slave ship by pirates, and traded to those settlers for goods and victuals. Their names weren't even recorded. They were listed as 20-some-odd Africans. That's how this country was founded. It's uncomfortable, but it's true. I'll spare you the full 400-year history, but there's a pattern to it. History may not repeat itself, but it rhymes. The history of our country has been, how do we reconcile the ideal upon which we were founded by the reality upon which we were founded? How do we reconcile that every time we make progress towards that ideal, and we have made progress, I wouldn't be standing here today in a body that was not built for people like me, but may have been built by people like me. We've made progress. But every time we make progress, there's a backlash. And that backlash has included three things: propaganda, violence, and voter suppression. My great-grandfather experienced the first backlash. Born on a plantation in Alabama, he got the right to vote after he took a literacy test, after he had to answer 2 sets of questions because he was on a list of people not to register because he was a teacher, teaching other Black people in his community how to get a better life. He experienced the terror of lynchings, being afraid if you looked at someone the wrong way, you could be hung. If you disrespected someone, you could be shot by a mob that was never brought to justice. The second backlash came, that was the backlash that came in response to Reconstruction, which was never fully taught in my history books. We went from the end of the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement, the second wave of progress. And in response to that progress was the backlash of our leaders being assassinated. I heard these stories from my parents and my grandparents, but they're not here anymore. My father passed away over a decade ago. My mother passed away last year. As more and more people who lived under the terror of Jim Crow are moving on from this mortal plane, it is important we keep that history alive. And not all of them shared that history because it was painful, it was uncomfortable. They didn't like talking about it. And many of them did, but their stories are fading. That's why our museums and history and books that can continue this legacy on are important. Because I can't quite explain to my now 10 and 15-year-old children in quite the same eloquence that my parents did. I can't explain what they went through the same way. But when they were here for spring break earlier this year, and we went to the African American History Museum, watching that history come alive through my children again, I felt my parents with me. I felt my grandparents with me. I felt my great-grandparents with me. And as I stood in the exhibit on the middle passage, thinking about what somebody in my family lived through so that I could be in here in this moment and fight this latest backlash to erase our history. Somebody survived being chained in the bottom of a slave ship with hundreds of other people from Africa to Virginia. But I don't know who they are. I don't know who their children are. I don't know who their grandchildren are. Because in my father's family, we can only trace back to his grandparents. Because before that, no one deemed it important to write down the names of the people they enslaved. That is why this is personal for members of the Congressional Black Caucus. But it is important to our country to heal. Because the American people are family. And like every family, we've suffered trauma. And like every family, if you ignore the trauma, if you bury the trauma, it doesn't heal. The only way it heals is when you acknowledge what happened and you learn from it. And that's why every time there's a backlash and it involves propaganda to erase what happened and the truth, it doesn't erase it, it buries it. And the trauma flares up. And that's why do you think the Russians in 2016 decided to choose race as the scab to pick at? Because in this country, we have never truly healed. And until we talk about all of our history, we will never heal as a country. And we will never live up to the ideals upon which we were founded. But the Congressional Black Caucus will fight every day to make sure that our stories are told, that all American stories are told, whether they are uncomfortable or not, because they happened. And they made us who we are as a people. It made us who we are as a nation, and we cannot run from it. With that, I yield back.
I want to thank the gentle lady for her personal and powerful story about the benefits of history as well as healing. It is now my privilege to yield to the Honorable Glenn Ivey from the state of Maryland. Mr. Ivey.
I want to thank my colleagues, those who are hosting this event today, from Ohio, from California, my colleague from Virginia who just spoke, which I hadn't actually planned on talking much about that, but after my family moved from North Carolina, we moved to Virginia. And one of the things I recall was Virginia history. So we had our history book, and interestingly enough, it started with Jamestown and Williamsburg, obviously. Then it kind of skipped ahead to the Civil War. And the focus of the Civil War, there was no mention of slavery in between the two, by the way, or barely any. The focus of the Civil War was what they called the great Confederate generals, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and the others. And it talked about how great they were as generals and the fact that if only they'd had an equal amount of supplies to the Union generals, they would have been able to win the war. And the war they called the war between the states, and in some instances, the War of Northern Aggression, which is a little hard to imagine these days, but that was the school book I learned from in my public school in Prince William County. And the interesting thing about that, we've seen what the effort was with respect to the attempt to change history that came in the United States after the Civil War, after the African-American community was liberated from slavery, and there was a chance to have the opportunity to vote, to participate fully in the community, in the nation. And that was overturned, essentially, by a deal that was cut between the North and the South after President Lincoln was assassinated. And it led to the segregation of African Americans across the country. And what went side by side with that was the obliteration of the actual history of what had led up to that point. And the twisting of history to argue that, essentially, African Americans couldn't be trusted to be voting people in the democracy, that in some instances, they even claimed that African Americans belonged in chains, belonged in slavery. And as you heard earlier, the suggestion, I think that was from the Florida state government, not 150 years ago, but recently, that African Americans actually benefited from being enslaved. Now, we all know how silly that is, or I guess our colleagues necessarily, maybe not in Florida, but it's a ridiculous statement, and it's the kind of erasure and twisting of history that I think it's critical for us to make sure we fight against. My mother was a librarian. My mother-in-law ended up being a librarian, so we had a heavy concentration of the focus on books in my family during that stretch, and the importance of history. So I thought I'd give a couple of examples of some of the issues that had popped up with respect to what the Trump administration has done. This is the executive order by President Trump that was issued in March, and it was entitled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. But the reality is it wasn't about restoring truth and sanity to American history. It was really about hiding and deleting and whitewashing American history. Now, one of the things they did in their first steps was to go to the Naval Academy. I guess an executive order was issued, and the Department of Defense focused on this in part. And the Naval Academy, in response to that executive order and those directions from the White House and the Pentagon, pulled a book called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings from the bookshelves at the Naval Academy. That was by Maya Angelou, who is one of the most respected writers in American history. If I recall correctly, she was one of the poet laureates as well, and spoke at one of the inaugurations as well. Now, what I thought was interesting about that was, even though they pulled Maya Angelou's book from the shelves, and the book, by the way, was about, it was an autobiography, and it talked about her rise, her growth as she was raised in the South, and the terrible things that she went through, including sexual assault and racial discrimination issues, but how she rose above it. In fact, a later book that she wrote based on one of her poems is called And Still I Rise. And it's the type of inspiring literature that I think not only should we not be hiding from Americans, but we should be encouraging all Americans to see. But the Naval Academy pulled that book, but they left 2 copies of another book, Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, still on the shelves. And in addition to that, there was another book that they left called The Bell Curve. Now, you might not recall The Bell Curve. I distinctly remember when it was published. But The Bell Curve argued that black men and women are genetically less intelligent than white people. And that's still on the shelves at the Naval Academy. But the book that critiqued The Bell Curve, that was pulled. This is what we're getting from the Trump administration. So about of the books that they reviewed, they called for them to review, I think it was 900 books approximately, and they reviewed those books. And the group that did the review, based on the request from the Trump administration, based on the executive order, ultimately resulted in nearly 400 books being selected for removal from the Naval Academy's library. 400 books. Now, what I thought was interesting about that was the person the library is named after, Admiral Nimitz, actually held a totally different conception about what should happen with respect to sharing of information and books. In fact, he founded the library for this 179-year-old institution in Annapolis, Maryland. I represent Maryland. I'm proud of the Naval Academy in Annapolis, but this is a low moment in the history of the Academy, I must say. And, in response to this decision, one of its alums, Admiral James Stavridis, said, "The Pentagon might have had an argument if midshipmen were being forced to read these 400 books." And by the way, he's an author, an Academy alumnus, and former commander of all U.S. forces in Europe. But as I understand it, they were just among the hundreds of thousands of books in the Nimitz Library which a student might opt to check out. What are we afraid of keeping from them in the library? I couldn't agree with this question more. Book banning can be a canard, he continued, a canary in the coal mine, and could predict a stifling of free speech and thought. Books that challenge us make us stronger. We need officers who are educated, not indoctrinated. General Mark Milley, not a fan of the Trump administration, and certainly the feeling seems to be mutual. But you may recall back in June 2021, this issue came up where they were challenging him with respect to something that was called critical race theory. And we won't go into all of that, but keep in mind that K through 12 schools never taught critical race theory. But in any event, they brought it up with General Milley. And he said, I've read Mao Zedong, I've read Karl Marx, I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. He then offered an argument for expanding political studies in the service of defending the Constitution after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. He said, I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it. What is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? Just a little aside on that point, there's a placard that has been requested to be posted here in the Capitol that represents the brave men and women of the Capitol Police Department who fought to protect the people who were trapped here by the attacking mob. And the Republican leadership refuses to post that plaque. But you can't change history. Another example, Jackie Robinson. Now, they wanted to eliminate issues about Jackie Robinson, information about Jackie Robinson, the celebrated baseball player, Hall of Fame star, who was a great baseball player for sure, but also celebrated because he integrated Major League Baseball. Prior to his arrival, African Americans basically weren't allowed to play in the major leagues. But they wanted to strip out this information about Jackie Robinson. This is an article that talked about the fact that Robinson's military service during World War II, when he served in the 761st Black Panthers Tank Battalion, and noted that he was court-martialed but eventually acquitted after refusing to move to the back of an Army bus in 1944. He received an honorable discharge later that year. Now, this touches me a bit because my father-in-law served in World War II as well, and he was a decorated soldier as well. In fact, after World War II, he re-enlisted for ground combat in Korea. They made him wait a few days to make sure that he really knew what he was doing, and of course he did. He's buried at Arlington now. Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, outstanding service, rose to the level of captain. When he came back from Italy, where he'd been serving, and he got back to the United States, all-black battalion, but they were German prisoners who actually had a chance to ride in the front of the train, where he and his other black colleagues still had to ride in the back. Still had to ride in the back because segregation continued. Even though the war against Hitler was supposed to be a war to end racism and fight the Nazi discrimination, when he got back here, it was still the same old story. Now, they also tried to strip out information about Medgar Evers, a World War II veteran, a Mississippi civil rights activist who was assassinated in 1963. He'd been a leader with the local NAACP and was assassinated because he was fighting for the right to vote for African Americans. They erased that information from the Arlington National Cemetery website. The Army removed, but subsequently reinstated a website dedicated to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the most decorated unit in military history. That unit was made up of Japanese American soldiers who fought despite the internment of their families. Those were the concentration camps that held Japanese Americans, largely in California, but in other parts of the country. But despite that, Japanese American soldiers volunteered to fight in World War II. And one of those soldiers, Daniel Inouye, later became a long-serving United States Senator from Hawaii. I remember Senator Inouye primarily from his leadership in the Watergate hearings. An outstanding public servant, a great American, a great soldier, but they tried to eliminate his history from the history books here. We had this most recent incident, too. President Trump fired the Librarian of Congress. Now, this one kind of came out of the blue, it seemed to me. She'd served in that position for 10 years, including during his first administration. She'd been celebrated as a great librarian. She'd done a great job in the position. Normally, you get long terms for your service, and there was no indication that she'd done anything wrong until Trump 2 came back, Trump 47, and they decided to fire her. They gave her a 2-sentence letter that said, after all of your years in service, you're still terminated. And then it kicked up such a controversy. The White House press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, said there were quite concerning things that she had done at the Library of Congress in the pursuit of DEI and putting inappropriate books in the library for children. Now, keep in mind a couple of things. One is that the Library of Congress is not a lending library for the public, so there was no risk that any kids would be taking these books or any books from the Library of Congress. Secondly, the Library of Congress has over 178 million items. It's the repository for the United States Congress. The department that deals with copyright for books is under that, and the Congressional Research Service is under her authority as well. So that's why they have so many books, including books that you or I might not want to read or we might not agree with, but the point is all of the books need to be there because we need that repository. Oh, and by the way, it's the Library of Congress. Those of us here in Congress, this is a resource for us. There's absolutely no reason that the President of the United States should be meddling with our repository. It's really inappropriate and wrong, and that's why it hadn't happened prior to that. Congressman Jerry Connolly made this observation about the librarians, her name is Hayden, her firing. With this decision, Donald Trump continues his attempts to censor our history, bend our culture to his will, and interfere with the free flow of information among the American people. It's a national disgrace. I couldn't agree more. The reality is that despite the executive order, this administration is actually making it more difficult for children and adults to learn about American history. They're slashing museum budgets by gutting the Institute of Museum and Library Services. They're defunding public broadcasting and public television. The president does not decide what is worthy of being in a museum, and he shouldn't decide what is worthy of being in a library. He should not be deciding what our children learn in school, and he should not be afraid of American history. Knowing our history makes us stronger because knowledge is power. That power, the power of the truth, belongs to all Americans. It's the basis of our democracy. It's the key to our future. And it's critical as the United States moves forward that we preserve our history, learn our history, and understand our history so that we don't repeat the negative aspects of our history. I thank my colleagues. I thank the Congressional Black Caucus for their work on this matter, and I yield back.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time is remaining?
The gentlewoman has 4 minutes remaining.
Okay, all right, thank you. As we talk about the importance of Black history tonight, I also want to highlight Northeast Ohio's rich connection to Black history. In Northeast Ohio, our Black history legacy stacks up against anyone's. In fact, one of the first places to celebrate Black History Month for a whole month was Kent State University. After decades as just a week-long event, Kent State made it a full month in 1970. 6 years before the White House did. Northeast Ohio is also home to the great Jesse Owens, who smashed the myth of white supremacy on a global stage right under Hitler's nose at the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Northeast Ohio has shaped the life and stories of Nobel Prize-winning author Toni Morrison and the poet Langston Hughes. Cleveland is where Larry Doby integrated the American League. Carl Stokes made history as the first Black mayor of a major city, and where Garrick Morgan invented the traffic light. Black leadership from Cleveland also changed the calendar. In 1890, Ohio Representative John Patterson Green, the first Black elected official in Cleveland, authored legislation to establish Labor Day as a state holiday 4 years before it became a federal holiday. Frederick Douglass spoke in Cleveland multiple times, beginning in the 1840s, connecting us to the abolition movement nationwide. In 1851, Sojourner Truth delivered her famous "Ain't I a Woman?" speech down the road in Akron, a landmark event in Black feminism. A century later, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke frequently in Cleveland and lent his support for our local civil rights efforts. Northeast Ohio's Black history legacy includes 3 representatives who came before me: Rep. Louis Stokes, Rep. Stephanie Tubbs Jones, and Rep. Marcia L. Fudge, represented Northeast Ohio for over 50 years. They chaired committees and subcommittees and served on some of the House's most powerful committees. Congressman Stokes and Congresswoman Fudge both chaired the Congressional Black Caucus. In 2021, Congresswoman Fudge was confirmed as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and the first Black woman to lead the agency since the 1970s. Mr. Speaker, it's important that we continue to celebrate Black leadership, Black achievement, and Black excellence because we have been so frequently ignored, erased, and minimized. Finally, Black history is American history and local history in Ohio and across the country. In 1967, Dr. King spoke at Glenville High School in Cleveland. Speaking that day, he talked about how our history isn't separate from the country's, it's part of it. He said, abused and scorned as we may be, our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America. Speaking in Cleveland, Dr. King concluded with a simple message which should be our charge today. We must keep moving. We must keep going. That's the goal of the Congressional Black Caucus, to keep us moving forward. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of my time. Oh, I'm sorry. May I unyield the balance of my time?
Does the gentlewoman have a motion?
Yes. Before I make my motion, I do want to say this. As my colleagues and I have highlighted over this past hour, how this administration is intentionally attacking Black history, which is an attack on American history.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
We will not allow this attack to continue. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Does the gentlewoman have a motion?
I move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.